prepare to have your mind blown. The tale of Noah's cataclysmic global flood is undeniably iconic, etching itself into the record of history and captivating readers across the globe. But here's the real kicker. It turns out that Noah's heroic adventure is not as original as we might think. Brace yourself for a jaw-dropping revelation as this video unfurls the shocking truth. The biblical flood, starring our beloved hero Noah, is essentially a cunning makeover of ancient Mesopotamian mythology. Yes, you heard it right. Genesis chapters 1 through 11, and even more tantalizing details scattered throughout the book, draw heavily from pre-existing myths and legends. This begs the question, what does it mean if Noah's story is merely a Johnny-come-lately shamelessly borrowing from older sources to spin the Genesis narrative? Shouldn't we pause and reflect on the historical accuracy of what we are reading? Could it be that Adam and Eve, Cain and Abel, Enoch and Noah are nothing more than fictional figures molded from the much earlier myths they so craftily repurposed? Now hold on to your seats, because this mind-blowing video not only provides undeniable evidence of Genesis' dependence on Mesopotamian tales, but it also delves into the intricate web of literary intertextuality and narrative motifs that tie these stories together. It's time to embrace the truth. These accounts are not factual records, but rather captivating stories, woven with the fabric of mythology and legend. So the next time someone tries to convince you that the Bible predates these Mesopotamian myths, or that it stands independently without borrowing their narrative threads, unleash this video upon them. It's a compelling expose that will leave even the staunchest defenders of biblical historicity in awe. The origins of Noah's flood. Picture this: a God who just a few chapters earlier created everything, including man fashioned in his divine image, resembling him and his celestial council. All was splendidly good until those pesky humans went and messed it all up by nibbling on forbidden godly fruit. Let's not forget that it was the same God who planted a talking snake in the garden to tempt these unsuspecting mortals into unlocking their eyes and gaining godlike knowledge of good and evil. Instead of taking responsibility for placing the temptation in their path, God, like any loving parent, promptly evicted his own creation from the primordial paradise that suspiciously resembles a Babylonian utopia. Now Adam and Eve are left to toil and struggle, scraping out a living and experiencing excruciating pain during childbirth. But hold on tight, because it gets even worse. The first children of these first parents end up on an ancient version of unsolved mysteries, with Cain committing fratricide and bumping off his only brother, Abel. And you won't believe the reason behind this murder spree. Apparently, Cain offered God a humble basket of fruits, while Abel dazzled the divine taste buds with a mouth-watering filet mignon. And just like a doting parent, God rejected the fruit salad and devoured Abel's juicy barbecue. It's almost reminiscent of the time Prometheus pulled a fast one on Zeus, who demanded that humans sacrifice a portion of each animal to the gods. Prometheus decided to wrap bones in succulent fat, cleverly hiding the filet mignon inside the animal's hide. When Zeus made his choice, He unwittingly selected the fatty deception, resulting in his wrath and the subsequent punishment of mankind and Prometheus. Ah, the good times. Back to our twisted family saga. Cain is cursed and banished from the land, eventually settling down, finding a wife, and naming his child Enoch, a child with multiple parentage, as it turns out. You see, the genealogies in Genesis 4 and Genesis 5 are nothing more than fabricated traditions cleverly inserted into the Bible. It's like having two contradictory creation accounts in Genesis 1 and 2, where a priestly scribe tried his best to merge them into one cohesive tale. The same game is at play with these genealogies leading up to Noah's flood, the cataclysmic event that wiped out this once very good creation. Thanks to this priestly scribe or scribes, many later traditions try to explain the lineage of Cain versus Seth. Now, if you're as curious as I am about why the seemingly good God would obliterate mankind and still be regarded as benevolent by the biblical authors, then stay tuned. This video will not only reveal the true origins of Noah's flood story, but also debunk the flood-related conspiracy theories and misinformation that run rampant on the internet. So forget tuning into Joe Rogan for ill-informed flood discussions, and join us as we present the facts straight from the mouths of experts specializing in ancient Sumer, Old Babylon, Assyria, New Babylon, the ancient Near East, and of course, the Bible. Mesopotamian precursors. It should come as no surprise to us that the story of a god destroying the world with a flood was not new to the Book of Genesis. More than 1,000 years before the story found its way into the Bible, it was etched into clay tablets in ancient Mesopotamia, in the Sumerian and Akkadian languages. The earliest cuneiform texts that contain the Mesopotamian flood story date to the early 2nd millennium BCE, a time known as the Old Babylonian period, roughly 2000 to 1600 BCE. We will begin with the Sumerian version of the story, excavated from the ancient Sumerian city of Nippur. The story begins with creation, where the gods An, Enlil, Enki, and Ninhursag created humanity and the animals in order that they might do work to provide for the gods.
Let them build many cities so that I can refresh myself in their shade. Let them lay the bricks of many cities in pure places. Let them establish places of divination in pure places. And when the fire quenching is arranged, the divine rites and exalted powers are perfected, and the earth is irrigated, I will establish well-being there.
After a fragmentary section, the story continues, describing how kingship descended from heaven to earth, and the cities were built in Sumer. These sacred cities were assigned to individual gods. Enki was to lead Eridu, Sud was over Shuruppak, and the sun god Utu was placed in charge of Sippar. The land had been established, the right to rule had been granted by the gods, and the sacred temples had been built in the cities for the benefit of their gods. All was right with the world, but it was not to last. The text again becomes fragmentary, but we can see that something eventually went wrong. The gods convened and determined that they would send a flood over all the earth in order to destroy their creation. An, Enlil, Enki, and Ninhursag made all the gods of heaven and earth take an oath by invoking An and Enlil, but Enki quietly dissented, having taken the oath not to reveal these plans to humanity. He could not simply warn the people. Instead, through his cunning, he descended to earth and found Zi-ud-sudra, the one of long life, who would ultimately survive the flood. Enki could not simply warn Zi-ud-sudra. Instead, he spoke to a wall that Zi-ud-sudra was standing near.
Side wall, standing at my left side. Side wall, I will speak words to you. Take heed of my words. Pay attention to my instructions. A flood will sweep over. A decision that the seed of mankind is to be destroyed has been made. The verdict, the word of the divine assembly, cannot be revoked. The order announced by An and Enlil cannot be overturned.
Enki then explains to Zi-ud-sudra what he is to do to survive. Although the text is broken in the section that describes the instructions and the building of the boat, when the story picks back up, we see the flood had finally happened.
All the windstorms and gales arose together, and the flood swept over. After the flood had swept over the land, and waves and windstorms had rocked the huge boat for 7 days and 7 nights, Utu, the sun god, came out, illuminating heaven and earth. Zi-ud-sudra could drill an opening in the huge boat, and the hero Utu entered the huge boat with his rays. Zi-ud-sudra, the king, prostrated himself before Utu. The king sacrificed oxen and offered innumerable sheep.
In the final section of the story, the gods determine what to do with Zi-ud-sudra, as they had not expected anyone to survive the flood.
More and more animals disembarked onto the earth. Zi-ud-sudra, the king, prostrated himself before An and Enlil. An and Enlil treated Zi-ud-sudra kindly. They granted him life like a god. They brought down to him eternal life. At the same time, because of preserving the animals and the seed of humankind, they settled Zi-ud-sudra, the king, in an overseas country, in the land of Bilmun, where the sun rises.
We now turn our attention to the famous Akkadian story of Atrahasis, part of the old Babylonian flood tradition from Mesopotamia. The story opens with the lesser gods doing the work of forced labor, work that would later be placed upon mankind.
When gods were men, they did forced labor. They bore drudgery. Great indeed was the drudgery of the gods. They forced labor was heavy. The misery too much.
The great gods Anu, Enlil, and Enki divided up the world, An taking the sky as his home, Enlil taking the earth, and Enki dwelling in the Apsu, the freshwater sphere under the earth. The lesser gods toiled and labored, eventually rebelling against the great gods. Eventually, the great gods decided to create humanity by killing the lesser god who started the rebellion and mixing him with clay to create humans. who would then bear the load of serving the gods. Humanity begins to reproduce.
1,200 years had not gone by. The land had grown numerous. The peoples had increased. The land was bellowing like a bull. The god was disturbed with their uproar. Enlil heard their clamor. He said to the great gods, "The clamor of humankind has become burdensome to me. I am losing sleep to their uproar."
Enlil devises a plan to get some sleep, decimate humanity. He first attempts to send a plague, but Enki, just as in the Sumerian flood story, tells a human by the name of Atrahasis, exceedingly wise, how to save everyone from the plague, and humanity continues to make noise. After another 1,200 years, the noise continues to increase, and Enlil devises another plan.
Cut off provisions for the peoples. Let plant life be too scantly for their hunger. Let Adad, the storm god, withdraw his rain. Below let the flood not come up from the depths.
Again, Enki advises Atrahasis, who rescues humanity. Finally, Enlil decides to send a flood, but not before Enki swears an oath that he will not make known the plan of the gods to humanity. As in the Sumerian story, Enki uses his cunning to circumvent his oath.
Wall, listen to me. Read, Wall. Pay attention to my words. Flee house, build boat, forsake possessions, and save life. The boat that you build, cover her with tarpaulins, roof her over like the depths, so that the sun will not see inside her. Let her be roofed over fore and aft. The gear should be very firm. The pitch should be very firm. Make her strong.
Atrahasis goes to people in his city and gets them to help him construct the boat, and he gathers animals and other provisions. When the time for the flood actually came, he was ready.
The outlook of the weather changed. Adad began to roar in the clouds. The god they heard his clamor. He brought pitch to fill his door. By the time he had bolted his door, Adad was roaring in the clouds. The winds were furious as he set forth. He cut the mooring rope. He released the boat.
The storm that brought the flood was so terrible, so violent, that even the gods themselves were afraid.
The gods became afraid of the clamor of the deluge. They took refuge in heaven. They crouched outside. Anu became afraid of the clamor of the deluge. It was terrifying the gods.
Furthermore, they realized that without humanity to serve them, they were unable to eat and drink, for humans provided their daily provisions. They immediately regretted their decision to annihilate humanity. There is a break in the text, but when it picks back up, it appears that the flood has subsided and Atrahasis has offered sacrifices to the gods.
The gods sniffed the savor. They were gathered like flies around the offering. After they had eaten the offering, Nintu arose to rail against all of them. Where has Anu come to, the chief decision maker? Has Enlil drawn nigh the incense? They who irrationally brought about the flood and relegated the peoples to catastrophe.
The end of the story is again fragmentary, but Enlil finds out that Atrahasis has survived.
The warrior Enlil saw the vessel and was filled with anger at the Igigi gods. All we great, Anuna gods resolved together on an oath. Where did life escape? How did a man survive the catastrophe? Anu made ready to speak and said to the warrior Enlil, who could do this but Enki?
The final Mesopotamian story that we will cover that preserves the flood story is the Epic of Gilgamesh, another text that goes back to the Old Babylonian period. Although the flood story is contained in Tablet 11 of the Epic, we should briefly explain the events leading up to the telling of the story. Gilgamesh, who was 2/3 divine, was an unruly king of the city of Uruk. The people of Uruk ask the gods to help, and they create Enkidu, who has commonality with the animal kingdom and lives in the steppe outside the city. He is eventually made human and brought to meet Gilgamesh, and together they go on grand adventures in order to make a name for themselves. Ultimately, however, Enlil becomes displeased with some of their actions, and Enkidu is condemned to die. After mourning the loss of his friend, Gilgamesh feels his own mortality and sets off to find eternal life. This ultimately leads him to the end of the world, across the Sea of Death, where he finds Utnapishtim, meaning I found life, a man who had gained immortality. When Gilgamesh asked Utnapishtim how he was able to find eternal life, he told him the story of how he survived the flood. Utnapishtim described how the gods determined to send a flood to destroy humanity.
Their father Anu swore an oath, and their counselor, the hero Enlil, their chamberlain, the god Ninurta, and their sheriff, the god Ennugi. Princely Ea swore with them also, repeating their words to a fence made of reed. O fence of reed, O wall of brick, hear this, O fence. Pay heed, O wall, O man of Shuruppak, son of Ubartutu. Demolish the house and build a boat. Abandon wealth and seek survival. Spurn property, save life. Take on board the boat all living things, seed.
Utnapishtim builds the boat and gathers the animals and all his provisions. The flood came, and the gods became terrified at the storm and regretted sending the flood.
Even the gods took fright at the deluge. They fret and went up to the heaven of Anu, lying like dogs curled up in the open. The goddess cried out like a woman in childbirth. Belet Eli wailed, whose voice is so sweet.
The olden times have turned to clay, because I spoke evil in the gods' assembly and declare a war to destroy my people. It is I who give birth. These people are mine. And now, like fish, they fill the ocean.
The storm eventually relented, and the boat ran aground on Mount Nimush.
The seventh day when it came, I brought out a dove. I let it loose. Off went the dove, but then it returned. There was no place to land. So back it came to me. I brought out a swallow. I let it loose. Off went the swallow, but then it returned. There was no place to land, so back it came to me. I brought out a raven. I let it loose. Off it went, the raven. It saw the waters receding, finding food, bowing and bobbing. It did not come back to me.
Utnapishtim disembarks, offers sacrifices, and the gods gather around the sacrifice. Enlil discovers that humans have sacrificed. Then at once Enlil arrived. He saw the boat. He was seized with anger, filled with rage at the divine Igigi.
From where escaped this living being? No man was meant to survive the destruction.
After it is revealed how they survived, Enlil grants Utnapishtim and his wife a special gift.
In the past, Utnapishti was a mortal man, but now he and his wife shall become like us, gods. Utnapishti shall dwell far away, where the rivers flow forth. So far away they took me, and settled me where the rivers flow forth.
The flood story in the Bible. The biblical flood story follows the same pattern as what we have seen thus far in the Mesopotamian traditions, with a few important distinctions that we will cover later. Genesis 6 opens with human beings greatly multiplying, just as we have seen in other stories. However, divine beings come down and procreate with human women. In this context, the story describes humanity as being incredibly wicked, leading to Yahweh regretting that he had even created them. He then resolves to destroy all humans save for Noah and his family. He instructs Noah on how to build a boat and to gather animals to bring aboard. Yahweh sends the flood and destroys all life on earth, save for those on the boat. After the flood waters recede, Noah sends out his birds to see if the waters had gone down far enough for land to come back into view.
After 40 days, Noah opened a window he had made in the ark and sent out a raven. And it kept flying back and forth until the water had dried up from the earth. Then he sent out a dove to see if the water had receded from the surface of the ground. But the dove could find nowhere to perch, because there was water over all the surface of the earth. So it returned to Noah in the ark. He reached out his hand and took the dove and brought it back to himself in the ark. He waited 7 more days and again sent out the dove from the ark. When the dove returned to him in the evening, there in its beak was a freshly plucked olive leaf. Then Noah knew that the water had receded from the earth.
Noah and his family ultimately disembark and offer sacrifices to Yahweh, who smells the sacrifice and is pleased. The flood narrative in Enoch. The Book of Enoch also describes the flood in an expanded form of what we see in the Book of Genesis.
When the sons of men had multiplied, in those days beautiful and comely daughters were born to them, and the watchers, the sons of heaven, saw them and desired them. And they said to one another, "Come, let us choose for ourselves wives from the daughters of men, and let us beget children for ourselves."
When these angelic beings begun to mate with the human women, they taught them sorcery, charms, cutting of roots and plants, along with a host of divination practices. When we come to the flood story, Noah realizes that destruction is on the horizon. He travels to the ends of the earth and finds his great-grandfather Enoch to find out what is happening. Enoch replies,
"A command has gone forth from the presence of the Lord against the inhabitants of the earth, that their end is accomplished, for they have learned all the secrets of the angels and all the violence of the Satans, and all their powers, the hidden secrets and all the powers of those who practice sorcery, and the powers of brightly colored garments, and the powers of those who cast molten images for all the earth."
leaving no question as to the reason for the flood. The text reads,
"Because of their iniquity, their judgment has been accomplished and will not be withheld in my presence. Because of the sorceries that they have searched out and learned, the earth will be destroyed and those who dwell on it, and these will never have a place of refuge forever. For they have shown them what is hidden, and they are judged. But as for you, my son, the Lord of spirits knows that you are pure and blameless of this reproach concerning the mysteries."
God eventually tells Noah,
"Your lot has come up to me, a lot without blame, a lot of love and uprightness. And now the angels are making a wooden vessel, and when the angels have completed that task, I will put my hand upon it and protect it, and from it will come the seed of life, and a change will take place, so that the earth will not remain desolate."
The story is not told in the same detail, but the destruction of the world by the flood with Noah being saved in a boat remains the same. Points of contact. Let's look at some of the specific lexical connections that can be seen in the Genesis flood story, starting with Genesis 6:14.
"Make for yourself an ark of gopher wood. Make the ark into compartments and cover it inside and out with pitch."
The Hebrew word kopher, pitch, that appears in this verse is highly suggestive of dependence of the biblical flood story on the Mesopotamian accounts. This word appears only here in Genesis 6:14. It shows up nowhere else in the Bible. Conversely, its Akkadian cognate, kupru, is very common, and it shows up in a wide variety of contexts, including, you guessed it, the flood stories in both Atrahasis and the Epic of Gilgamesh. In Atrahasis, Ea gives these instructions for building the ark.
"Roof it over like the depths, so that the sun will not see inside her. Let her be roofed over fore and aft. The gear should be very firm. The pitch, kupru, should be firm. Make her strong."
Similarly, in the Epic of Gilgamesh, we see the building of the ark in progress.
"At the first glimmer of dawn, the land was assembling at the gate of Atrahasis. The carpenter carried his adze. The reed cutter carried his stone. The shipwright carried his broad axe. The young men, the old men brought the coiled palm fiber. The wealthy carried pitch, kupru."
In short, in both Atrahasis and the Epic of Gilgamesh, in the sections describing the building of the ark, this very common word, kupru, pitch, bitumen, is used to describe how the ark is supposed to be sealed. In Genesis 6:14, we see the same Semitic word, kopher, in the exact same context. But moreover, this is the only place where the word appears in the Old Testament. Furthermore, there is another word for pitch, hemar, that appears elsewhere in the Hebrew Bible 3 times, Genesis 11:3, 14:10, and Exodus 2:3. This means that Hebrew already had a perfectly suitable word that referred to a substance that was used to seal the outside of something to make it watertight, and yet the author of this story opted for an entirely foreign cognate in its place. Another interesting word is used in Genesis 8:2.
"The headwaters of the deep and the windows of heaven were stopped up, Sakar, and the rain from heaven was held back."
This word, sakar, is another of these rare words appearing in the Hebrew Bible only twice, here and in Psalm 63:12. However, its Akkadian cognate, sekeru, is very common, and as you might expect, it occurs in contexts that speak of the stopping up of the waters in one version of Atrahasis.
Adad, the storm god, above made his rain scarce. Below the river was blocked up, sekeru, and did not raise the flood from the abyss. The fields diminished their yields.
The immediate contexts in these two flood narratives are not the same. Atrahasis is speaking of stopping up the waters to keep the crops from growing, while Genesis 8 speaks of stopping up the waters to end the flood itself. Nevertheless, the fact that this very rare word is used in common between both texts to describe the same scenario seems more than a simple coincidence. Before we conclude this section, let's look at one final point of contact in the flood account: the story of Noah sending out the dove. As you recall, from the introduction to this chapter, there is a clear parallel to this portion of the story in the Epic of Gilgamesh.
I brought out a dove and set it free. The dove soared off in search of food. No landing place appeared to it, so it came back. I brought out a swallow and set it free. The swallow soared off in search of food. No landing place appeared to it, so it came back to me. I brought out a raven and set it free. The raven soared off and saw the ebbing of the waters. It ate, scratched, and bobbed its head, so it did not come back.
While there are clear parallels between imagery here and in Genesis 8, there appears to be a more precise connection with verse 9a and tablet 11, line 150. These lines read,
But the dove did not find a perch for the sole of its foot, and it returned to him to the ark.
Genesis 8, verse 9.
No perch was available for it, and it came back to me.
Gilgamesh, tablet 11, verse 150. If there is a direct textual dependence of the biblical text on the Epic of Gilgamesh, then the later author would have translated the Akkadian line into Hebrew. Lo and behold, here, there is a strong conceptual similarity between these two lines. What's the point? There is an overall point to the story of the flood in Genesis. If you recall from Genesis 1, following their creation, humanity was charged to multiply and spread out through the earth. This command shows up again at the end of the flood account, and is ultimately resolved by force in Genesis 11. As we discussed above, this is part of a long literary movement throughout the primeval history, used to make a series of theological points. In this case, the priority of Yahweh's commission for humanity to multiply and fill the earth is in view. However, beginning in Genesis chapters 2 and 3, humanity crosses the boundary established between humans and deities by partaking of the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, becoming wise and godlike. Yahweh sends them out of the garden, and over time, humanity becomes numerous on the earth, and they again cross the boundary between deities and humans, Genesis 6, 1-4. In the flood, Yahweh essentially hits the reset button, returning the world to its pre-creation watery, chaotic state. For example, in Genesis 7, verses 11-23, we read of the water above the sky returning and the water under the earth coming back up. When compared to Genesis 1, verses 1-2, you see that the text is telling of an uncreation and a return to the pre-creation state. The result of the flood is a new beginning, with Noah and his family, culminating with the reiteration of God's command in Genesis 1:28,
to go and fill the earth.
As we noted above, humanity fails to obey this directive, but instead joins together to again attempt to cross the boundary between human and divine, by Cain building a city, and after the flood, Noah's descendants build a tower to reach heaven. This arc within the narrative strongly suggests that the primeval history is acting as an intentional inversion to Mesopotamian thought and traditions, particularly with respect to civilization. It should come as no surprise, therefore, that scholars see the flood story, with all its points of apparent intertextuality, as a counter-narrative to the Mesopotamian flood stories. It has been argued by scholars that one of the ways that the Genesis flood story responds to the Mesopotamian flood narratives is by contrasting the actions of the deities involved. Consider the story of Atrahasis. The flood is brought upon humanity, and the text reads,
"The goddess saw it, weeping, the midwife of the gods, the wise Mami. Let the day grow dark, let it turn back to gloom. In the assembly of the gods, how did I agree with them on annihilation?"
She continues,
"Where has Anu gone to? The chief decision maker, whose sons the gods heeded his command. He who irrationally brought about the flood and relegated the peoples to catastrophe."
We even see,
"The gods commanded annihilation. Enlil committed the evil deeds against the peoples."
Similarly, the Epic of Gilgamesh reads,
"The gods should come to the incense offering. But Enlil should not come to the incense offering because he brought on the flood without thinking and marked my people for destruction."
When you view the story of Atrahasis as a whole, you see that one of the main points of the narrative is to explain why so many humans die in birth, or why some women cannot conceive. This contrasts sharply with what we have argued the Genesis narrative is emphasizing, as the focus is on the command,
"Be fruitful and multiply."
More than this counter to the population reduction theme in the Mesopotamian tradition, it is likely that the Genesis flood account contrasts Yahweh's justification for sending the flood over against that which is seen in Atrahasis and the Epic of Gilgamesh. If Enlil and the other gods were considered lacking in judgment, and even evil in bringing the flood, what about Yahweh? The text does not leave us to wonder.
"And Yahweh saw the wickedness of humanity in the land was great, and every intention of the thoughts of their hearts was only evil all the time. And Yahweh was sorry that he had made humanity on the earth, and he was grieved in his heart."
Genesis 6, 5-6. Was Yahweh capricious and hasty in his destruction of the earth? Absolutely not. Far from the evil action of Enlil, Yahweh was morally bound to bring about the flood. At least that is how the authors who penned this myth tried to paint their God in this myth. It doesn't seem as bad, especially if one sees this God as just another ancient Near Eastern deity with limitations on what the humans were going to do from the start. How's that for a mind-blowing revelation? It seems that those clever biblical authors took the earlier flood traditions, which had been cherished stories in the ancient Near East for countless generations, and flipped the script to create their own flood myth. I owe a huge thanks to Dr. Joshua Bowen, an expert in Assyriology and Hebrew Bible studies, for his invaluable insights into the intricate details of this video. The man is a linguistic genius, practically fluent in Sumerian, Akkadian, Aramaic, Hebrew, and more, and he's up to date with the latest scholarship in the field. His book, The Atheist Handbook to the Old Testament, is an absolute goldmine of information on these topics and beyond. If you're serious about diving deeper, you can find it on Audible or grab a hardback copy. The link is in the description. Now let's dig a little deeper in the future videos and explore the Babylonian ziggurat, built by the mythical ancestors of Noah, one of whom hilariously goes by the name Nimrod. We might as well unearth the figurative bones of these characters to expose the world to their inventive storytelling and perhaps help some folks break free from the delusion of taking it all literally. If you're enjoying our discussion, consider subscribing to this channel so you'll be in the loop whenever we release a new video. Don't forget to share your favorite part of this video in the comments below. I'm genuinely curious if you've come across any fascinating connections to these myths in the ancient world. And hey, if you want to appease the mythical YouTube gods, hit that like button so they'll shower us with grace instead of torrential floods that could wipe us out. Also, if you want to join the Mythvision family, you can do that by becoming a patron of our Patreon or sign up for a Mythvision YouTube membership program. We've got a treasure trove of exclusive scholarly interviews that are available only to our family members. Our next exciting topics will include delving into the enigmatic Nimrod and possibly exploring the origins of Abraham. But before we tackle Abraham, let's take a moment in the upcoming videos to recap the biblical creation myth leading up to the legendary father of the Israelites. So buckle up and stay tuned, folks. Our goal is to navigate through the entire Bible, introducing you to the major players along the way. And always remember, we are Mythvision, your gateway to unraveling the mysteries of the past.